Welcome, everybody, to our yet unnamed podcast, which will be published at undetermined intervals, if that can be as vague as possible. Steve, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, Randy. It's sunny day in LA after this incredible amount of rain we've been having, and so I'm in a happy mood today, man.
I am concerned about California because it feels like God Himself is trying to kill all of you. It's either too hot, or you have no water, or you have too much water. What's the case today?
It's about between too much and quite not quite enough. And our it's so normally dry this time of year, typically, that the sprinkler system was going off in the middle of the rainstorm. We had to make a little adjustment, but it tells you, kind of where we are. It was snowing the other day, and we have citrus in our yard that is ready to be harvested, and yet in the middle of snowstorms in Southern California. What a weird world we're in.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Well, I am back in Kansas, where you hail from, where nothing ever happens.
Yeah,
So it's just fine. It's just normal.
that's
It's
right.
just everything's normal here. You and I met
Yeah.
about 100 years ago. We both served Lewis and Clark on the expedition and made ourselves friends. No, I think we met like I tried to put math to this about
Mhm.
1996. That's
Yeah, that's about exactly right. Yeah.
about 96, and you guys were still meeting at the Cincinnati Vineyard in the old building. I cannot remember the name of the street. What was that on? Uh,
Crescentville.
Crescentville, the Crescentville building.
Crescent.
And I think at the time you were doing 7 or 8 services, and I was visiting from out of
Right.
town, and I had to meet you because I had just never seen church like this before. It was just so life-giving
Oh,
to me. And so I chased you down in the tunnel, like down in the basement of the church, and caught you with no grid
yeah.
for how busy someone is when they have 8 services. I just figured, oh, he'll have time for me. And you were so kind. You actually did make time for me, and you and Jim Cochran prayed for me down there. And I
Really?
remember,
Oh,
yeah, I remember you just kept saying, "You're really with the Assemblies of God?" Because that seemed like the strangest thing about me at the time, and maybe it was. I often thought maybe you had a premonition that, well, that's not going to last. But that's when I met you,
oh,
and
that.
then we moved to Cincinnati maybe a year later, maybe not quite that long, and
Huh?
you and I kind of struck up a friendship and have
Right.
spent a lot of years just talking and drinking a lot of coffee and scheming and that sort of thing. There's so much that
Oh
we could
boy.
talk about, and as we talked about earlier, one of the things that you and I bring, which is a bit unique, is just a different perspective. We don't really know that much more than anybody else, but sometimes
Absolutely.
we look at things a little differently than they do. And there's so much. As I was making notes that I would love to talk about. We'll probably have to do in subsequent conversations. I'd love to talk with you about all that's gone on at Asbury over the past couple of weeks, and
Yeah.
the revival culture, and the good, the bad, and the ugly of that, because there's all of that. I'd love to talk church planting theories. I'd like to talk about, man, where did the seeker sensitive model go off the rails? Because there was a lot of good there, and then all of a sudden, nobody is using that language and hasn't now for years. But
Right.
today, the more pertinent thing today is I'm going to talk a little bit about the movie The Jesus Revolution and
Mhm.
Lonnie Frisbee. Now, I took a poll on Instagram of what you and I should talk about, and 40% of the people thought you and I should just sing the hits. That's what we should do today. Um,
Which Motown or
they didn't
Capitol Records?
specify, and I think we can only disappoint them. So we're
Okay.
not we're not gonna get into that. Although I know your repertoire is deep. But we do want to talk
Oh boy.
about the Jesus Revolution and Lonnie Frisbee. Everybody and their brother on YouTube is commenting on this and talking
Okay.
about it. Lots of interviews. I actually
Yes.
saw a reaction video to another interview. It's like one YouTuber interviews another guy. Now a third guy is videoing his reaction. I'm like, that is so far removed. I don't think we need that. But you have a bit of a unique insight because you were there for a part of that
Right.
season. Uh,
Exactly.
Give us a little context for how you found yourself there. I know you are a proud Kansan, uh, but you ended up in Los Angeles. What got you there, and what was the ramp up to that?
Yeah, the quick bingo jumping around on the scorecard. Raised in Kansas, my dad died at a young age. My mom's an anaesthetist, moved to Arizona, worked in a hospital there as an anaesthetist. I got a scholarship to go to Norway for a year out of high school and went there as an exchange student. And really during that year of 4 months of absolute darkness in northern Norway, October to February. I mean, that'll get anybody kind of nuts. But I thought, I'm just going to read while I'm here if I can do nothing real productive in terms of outdoor activities. And so began to read the New Testament. Long story short, got to Romans 8, came to Christ, personal faith. I know I kind of use that word a lot. Came to personal faith of really knowing Christ, and felt that a calling really to do evangelism. But almost immediately, Randy, this is interesting. Somebody gave me a book in Norwegian about what was happening in Southern California with the Jesus movement. And this is
Wow.
toward the tail end of the whole thing
Right.
in the early to mid 70s. But the cool thing was it was like this girl comes up I barely had met. She goes, I feel like God told me to give you this book. It was a translation of another book called Jesus People in Norwegian, like I said. And I read enough to get the gist of it. And amazingly, these picture after picture after picture were the people that I ended up later on becoming friends with.
Wow.
Lonnie, the guy who started the vineyard initially was Ken Gullickson, who was Chuck Smith's first hire and his launch into Calvary World. And so, fascinating. I finished college, was going to get into foreign missions. Janie and I had felt led to pray for and consider going to Kabul, Afghanistan. And we thought, has anybody ever heard of that place? Well, it's in the news constantly for a long
Yeah.
time anyway. But ended up at the last minute saying, we're not going to do that. We feel like the Lord spoke to us, go to LA, ask Ken Gullickson if he'll let you be an intern. And
Wow.
so we vacated Kansas and where I'd finished college and went out there, met with Ken. He hired me on the spot as an intern. Spent a couple of years there doing that and also teaching fourth grade, which has been essential in ministry. Settle down, keep your hands to yourself, and are you behaving? Those are the three big questions every pastor ought to ask.
That's an entire series right there. I'm good to go
Yeah,
to preach for the next couple of weeks. So, like, what year would this have been that you went out to Gullickson?
that would have been 80,
80. Okay.
right at the middle of 80, right after the whole Lonnie Frisbee thing happened at the vineyard at John Wimber's vineyard. Yeah,
Right.
that happened on Mother's Day. We were there. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to talk about that a little bit because the movie is kind of set earlier than that. Is that right?
Yes, yes. I think it was set when Lonnie first showed up
Right.
at Chuck's house. And a little old lady in that little Bible study at Chuck's house, Chuck was at a point where he said, I'm about ready to give up the ghost in terms of ministry. Because in his own words, he felt like he was manipulating people. He'd gotten to the point of, I'll do this and that'll happen and so forth and so on. And it's a form of, if you will, at best, a tool, but at worst, a manipulation.
Yeah.
And so Chuck said, I'm just going to maybe pull the plug. He did carpentry for a time. And this little old lady shows the Bible study. She goes, I have a word from the Lord. And she's kind of quivering her voice and says, one of these days, not too long from now, this little Bible studies will spawn a movement around the world. I'm getting chills here,
Wow.
Randy. That will change the face of the church. It'll be young people and the ones that nobody else wants. I find
Hmm.
that fascinating. The ones that nobody else wants, and it'll be big and fantastic. Anyway, Chuck said he heard it and he thought it was like Sarah at the tent when the angel said, "A year from now, you're going to have a baby."
Yeah.
And Sarah laughing at the tent, and he said, "I was just like that." I began to just scoff at the whole idea. It was so crazy because I was so burned out, and right then, about that time, within as I understood it, I certainly was before my time. As I have heard it told, that Lonnie showed up within a week or two. That a
Yeah.
guy in the Bible study had been hitchhiking, picked up a hitchhiker, Lonnie, and so I call him the original hippie.
Yeah. Yeah. So time goes by. The movie takes
uh,
place. You show up about 1980, and by this time, Wimber is got Anaheim going,
right,
correct? And
right.
he invites Lonnie to speak. Lonnie has been in the area now for a while, and he's kind of a known quantity.
Not by John. John knew nothing about Lonnie, and he had not heard any of the stories about Lonnie. So this skinny,
This was before the
not
days of
large
social
person.
media when things happened and we did not know it within 12 seconds.
Exactly. And even if we could have, I'm not sure John would have been drawn to a guy like Lonnie, who's this. He's basically a fairly feral person, and Yep. Yeah, we have that's too strong a word maybe, but he's a little bit he's an iconoclast. How's that? He
Yeah,
doesn't really fit very well.
right.
And so he asked John a number of times over a few weeks, can I speak at the Sunday night or something? And John just kept saying, not you're not going to speak. Who are you, by the way? Blah blah blah. And he thought Mother's Eve. There's only a few people at church. John did church every Sunday night. In his words, because people give money on Sunday nights. I kind of like that.
Yeah.
Uh, and he did Sunday night on Mother's Day. It's kind of like doing Sunday night when the Beatles are playing on Ed Sullivan's show or something. Nobody's gonna want to be there. And so anyway, what happens is he gives him the mic. He says, "We have about 10 minutes left, 15 minutes." He says, "Lonnie, go ahead." And Lonnie just spoke for a little bit. And again, I was not there, but I know a number who were there. They said it sounded like a folding chair explosion happened. Lonnie got up and said, "Repent, begin to honor the Holy Spirit." And he prayed the original prayer that has become famous, "Come, Holy Spirit."
Yeah.
And in his words, God told me to pray that prayer. And he's commented to me a time or two. He said, you can't just make up a prayer. You have to, when you get the prayer from God, but
Wow.
boom, something happens. And when he prayed it, people began to repent. They jumped over. And John said to me later that it was embarrassing because they were there till after midnight. They should have been out by like 9 o'clock or something. And the poor janitor kept flipping the lights on and off. The problem was nobody could move. Not everybody was paralyzed, but
Yeah.
a lot of people were so being touched by the Spirit that there was kind of like he called it a pile of logwood, on
Yeah.
top of each other. People just like that. And they
Now
finally got
for
out of there, but one guy shook for 2 days, he said.
now for a
Just shook
lot
in
of
the
us,
bed.
our first exposure to the vineyard was when we heard about things going on in Toronto. And
Yeah,
so we
I
look
agree.
at, there's a lot of the outside world looks at the vineyard through the Toronto lens, which is
Mhm.
not the original context for the vineyard. John was pretty understated, wasn't he?
Oh boy, John, and well, I would say Lonnie was not real flamboyant. I've seen him operate a number of times where I just thought it was so natural and so forth. But John certainly modeled that. Maybe he learned it from Lonnie a bit. I'm not sure. But when John would pray for people, et cetera, it's very, very low key. You almost wondered, was that the prayer?
Are we done?
And
Is it over?
are we done? Yes. And so very often, of course, John would get a prayer. He honored, he valued that. If I don't get a prayer from God, nothing's going to happen anyway.
Wow.
Why try to fake it? And so he would share, accordingly. But amazingly, once we began to tap into that whole line of thinking, it really does change the way we approach the Christian life.
Well, I
Is
think it changes the way we approach the Christian life, and I think it changes the way we minister within the gifts of the Holy Spirit.
absolutely yes.
One thing that I'll be honest, that really drew me to the Cincinnati Vineyard and to you and unknowingly to John and those things who I never met, but just stylistically was the lack of any pretense or anything that looked like manipulation. It's
Yeah.
it's either God shows up or he doesn't. Either way,
Mm-hmm.
he loves us and we go home.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not going to do anything to make something happen, which sounds a little bit like what Chuck Smith was talking about. There is a fine line between leading a meeting and manipulation.
Yes. Yes, I completely agree. Sometimes it's not very fine.
Yeah, true.
It's
I'm
a
trying to be
long,
kind. Yeah,
you're a nice guy, Randy.
I am. I am.
But John's whole beginning was he went to a retreat at a famous center in LA area called Forest Home. Many have heard of it if they've not been there. And he was there speaking in behalf of a friend of his who's a pastor. And he said, the lady has a word from you for you from the Lord. And John was completely skeptical. He mocked the idea of a word from the Lord at that point.
Wow.
And he went over and he calls it, she was overweight, I was overweight. We waddled off to the side, he called it. And she began to cry. She cried. And then she started like howling, practically crying, intensely crying. And he said he stood there a few feet away looking at his watch going, what in the world? I had to speak in about 5 minutes. So he finally says, lady, if you have something for me, would you just tell me now because I got to speak? Well, she looks up with, mascara down her cheek and red eyes, etc. And she goes, that was the word, the weeping. And John said, if you had shot me in the chest with a bazooka, I would not have been more surprised. He goes, Again, maybe I'm a sissy in my old age, but I get chills when I tell that story
Yeah.
as well because it so nails, I think, where so much of what God has done through John, through so many and so much in Vineyard World, I think, at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. So you get there. This is post Mother's Day. Lonnie's kind of in the swirl. How's he connecting to John? What's going on?
Yeah, Janie, my wife, and I showed up at a little impromptu retreat that happened over a couple of days in Anaheim. There at their offices, and Lonnie was there. There was about a dozen people altogether. They set up the long tables you would see, folding tables in many places, and all the interns that Ken had gathered together, and a few that John had as well. And so we gathered at these tables. Sitting right next to me is Lonnie. I had not met him. I had heard about this guy. I didn't even know his name, but I'd heard stories about the guy. And so he ends up the first day on. This is kind of interesting. He's wearing a cowboy outfit. The first day, I believe, was that day. And I'm going. I call it the word outfit because it wasn't just a hat or just Western jeans. It was the whole shebang.
He had it all.
Oh yeah, I think he might have had spurs on already. I'm not positive, but it was right up to that detail of the what he was wearing. The next day, okay, he shows up. He's dressed like I would say more like a green beret. He's got the beret, but it's there on his epaulette on his shoulder, and he's got the full on military look thing, and his pockets his frisbee, and I'm going. This guy is interesting.
Was he just that eccentric?
Oh boy, oh boy. It gets better. One more. The third day, he shows up dressed like a Vatican priest. The Vatican priest, if you're not aware of it, they have buttons. There are no zippers, no anything else except buttons throughout their whole outfit. I don't know if there's a spiritual significance there, but it goes down to the ankle. The shoes have to be buttoned, the special shoes. He has the hat on, the black one with the fuzz on top. Pause for effect.
What is his motivation? Help me here.
I said after the third one, I said that, Lonnie, is that your right? Okay. I said, you did this, you dressed like that. What's that all about? He looks at me like I'm stupid, which is very possible. And he says, because God told me to wear that.
Which you can't argue with him.
I don't know what to say.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
He got my attention, certainly. And I told that story more than once, but it's kind of mystical and yet cool at the same time that the guy lived
Childlike.
at a point. Yeah, very childlike.
Wow.
Yes, yeah,
Wow.
absolutely. God
So
told me to.
what was he I mean, what was engaging in conversation with him like that? Because I know some people have been tremendously gifted, but they were
Mhm.
hard to talk to.
Yeah,
What was he like?
Randy, he was. I think depending on the setting, but he was very simple way to express himself. He tried to be as basic as possible. I think that's safe to say that.
Mhm.
And he had some phonics problems, honestly. Having taught fourth grade, elementary
Yeah.
education background, and college and so forth, I could tell he had some reading issues. And sometimes I've seen him in Bible studies where he would have somebody else read the text. He had a paper clip or a whatever it was, a some piece of paper, and then he said, "Could you guys read that?" And it came across like including, but I knew enough that I really felt like it was way easier for somebody else to read than Lonnie.
Wow.
Because Lonnie, if you know his story a little bit, he pretty much was a dropout of high school. He was one of those socially promoted people where you're taller now and you're an age older, we'll put you in the next grade,
Right.
even though he never really he never became capable of reading at a normal level for what he was doing in life.
Mm.
Um, and so he really had a difficult time. He ran away from home, or essentially, and went to San Francisco, where he came to the Lord. That's a whole different track of talking about. But by the time that he was at Chuck's house, he was brand new in the Lord, brand new in a whole new way of thinking and living, having come to Christ and being an evangelist
Mhm.
gigantically at the beginning.
I remember you saying one time that he would operate in the supernatural. There's just miracles would just kind of almost like follow him around, and you
Yeah.
said something to the effect of, I wanted to get closer to that, and I just kind of tracked with him. What did that look
Mhm.
like? Did you guys hang out? Did you just kind of follow him around?
Yeah, I did. John Wimber said, "You want to get good at a skill in ministry. If you can identify what it is specifically," he says, like healing or moving in the spirit, getting words from the Lord, find somebody who's already doing it really effectively and fairly fluently, and just hang around them.
Yeah.
And so I thought, of all people, this guy Lonnie, he probably has 100 people asking him to do that. Maybe I could get in line. Well, I call him up and I said, "Hey, John said da 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 da." He goes, I said, "So can I be one of your people hang out?" And he goes, "I've never heard this conversation with John, but for sure, you're the only one that's ever called me."
Wow.
Randy, I'm thinking, they don't realize this is an historic figure here in front of us. And, he's not that much older than me. I had no idea he was going to die so quickly.
But
But
do you
oh my
think
gosh,
in the moment did they know he was that historic of a figure? That's something that always intrigues me is what do we understand about history in the middle of it?
yeah, I think John probably did, and possibly a couple, three others. I think Ken Gullickson probably could tell that he was probably a historic figure. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. John Wimber, he's another one.
Yeah.
I would say he's an honest to Pete historic figure.
Yeah.
He was. Can I tell you a weird John story? A ricochet off this. He was speaking in England at Holy Trinity Brompton,
Yeah.
and HTB as they call it. And during the break, or there's people being prayed for, a guy walks up to John, and he said it wasn't very well lit, so he didn't have all of his senses going on at once. But the guy says, "Could you sign my Bible?" And he says, "Well, I guess it's a little bit embarrassing. I've had people ask me the same thing." And he says, "Sign it right here." And he puts his finger on the page. John looks at it, and above the line there was Martin Luther, Charles Wesley, John Wesley. I mean, are you with me here? The
Yeah.
guy, William, the guy that started the Salvation Army in London, his name was on there, having signed it. And John signs it, going, "This is really odd." And he
Yeah.
shuts the thing, gives it back to the guy, and the guy says, "You're next."
Wow.
Boom, where's the hi-hat when you need it?
Yeah.
And John, of course, has died. I think John's influence is perhaps bigger now than it was when he was alive, theologically, anyway.
Yeah, I think
And
that's
the
true.
vineyard movement. Yeah,
Yeah. It's like the second and third generation have taken his ideas and propagated them further than one person could,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, that's true. I think even at higher levels of theologians are saying, there isn't just a power message or a word of God message. But in fact, here's another Lonnieism. He says, on one end of the spectrum, you dry up with the word, the word, the word. At the other end, you blow up with the spirit, the spirit, the
Yeah.
spirit. But if you can take the word and the spirit and marry them together, in the middle, they grow up.
Yeah. So
So,
what was it like?
and
Like what did your official Lonnie Frisbee internship like? Did you get a t-shirt with a badge or did you have to wear an outfit every day or what?
not that far down the list, but we had some fascinating things happen. Lonnie's favorite restaurant is was Denny's, and as he told the stories, he goes, "I would just hitch up hiking up and down the 5 freeway or the 101 rather in California, lead people to Christ. They drop me off at the next Denny's, and I would get on with another person, lead them to Christ, and get on another Denny's going south." But he loved those for whatever reason, pancake a combination or whatever it was. But we're sitting there the first night that I was out there just hanging around with them, and as we were sitting there, this guy behind us, and I get this, Randy, he began to arch his back. Some people watching this might be going, "This is getting kind of weird here." Well, that's sometimes what happens when God shows up. And from his heels to his head, he was bowed like, if you will, like this. He should have been like this. It was bowing forward. The guy was being touched by something was happening, and I think it was a lot of darkness that God wanted to deal with. And the guy, and I said, "Look, should we go pray for the guy, Lonnie?" And he says, "Oh, no, no, no." I go, "Why is that?" He goes, "Because what will happen is that God will probably zap the guy. Then the police will show up because people are concerned." I go, "Really?" And he goes, "That has happened to me until time and again until I learned my lesson about not praying in Denny's."
We of course are good friends with Lou Engle. And
Yeah.
Lou, when he prays or talks or gets excited, is a rocker, and he just rocks.
Oh,
And
oh,
he he also is a mad aficionado of donuts. If he's not fasting, he's probably eating donuts. And he was in Pasadena, I think at Pancho's Donuts, and he's early in the morning. He's sitting in his van and he's having his prayer time and eating his donut. And all of a sudden, there's a knock on the window, and it's Pasadena Police Department. Someone has called and said there's someone having a seizure in the van, and he had to explain, no, I'm not having a seizure. I'm actually quite fine. But so yeah, you got to be careful where you unleash things. You could
Oh,
end up
that is,
summoning the authorities.
yeah, that is funny, funny. He said the very first time that happened, he was sitting in at a Denny's again. He saw a guy walk into the men's restroom and he's wearing a neck brace, Randy. And he goes, I'm going to go pray for that guy. And again, he's 19, the kid, I don't know who was in there. It turns out he's a dishwasher and he did not speak English,
Hmm.
though he said that didn't stop me. I went ahead to explain the whole thing. I am a man of God. You're 19, okay, man of God, okay. And he says, I'm going to pray for you and you're going to be healed. And there's more there, but I'll just skip over to it. He says he prayed for the guy and he put his hand on his head and gave him a teeny little push. And just a teeny one, he said.
Just
And the
teeny one.
guy fell on the floor screaming and writhing in pain. I don't know what he's yelling in Spanish, but he goes out the door and I go, what did you do then? He goes, I put a 20 on the table and split before the police showed up.
There's a fine line between prayer and assault,
That's right. Yeah. That would be
especially
a,
when the other one doesn't speak English. So okay, here we are. These things are happening around him, like this really supernatural realm, people being delivered, miracles. What's what's in the wake of that? I mean, what was the eventual outcome of a lot of that?
um, well, he was traveling a lot. I, I know the story going back to the very, very beginning of his story. He was married at one point, quite young. Met his wife on the beach. He was out doing evangelism, and I don't know what happened there, if he led her to the Lord or whatever it was. But then I think, in the middle of traveling, that Lonnie got into some weird stuff. That his weak link in his chain was exposed,
Mhm.
and as having traveled a lot myself, as you have, Randy, it's really not smart to travel by yourself. I
Yeah,
know it's very lonely. It's you can't process things very well by yourself, and so he was doing probably too much of that, and I think he was vulnerable, and along the way, his sexual brokenness from a child was made him vulnerable,
yeah,
and but I do know that later on, to call Lonnie a homosexual is incorrect. Lonnie was, I would say, more technically a bisexual. He was married, of course. When I was hanging out with Lonnie, he was engaged to a friend of Janie's and mine,
mm.
who is a bona fide, pretty together person, who is a therapist, actually, which does not mean you're a together person therapist at all. I know that from experience too. But at the same time, I believe that she saw in Lonnie something that a lot of people didn't see,
Mm.
and she's again a therapist,
Yeah,
and a together one.
yeah. What would be just kind of as we wrap up here, a couple of
Mm-hmm.
takeaways maybe that you had from your time with Lonnie that helped kind of shape how you did ministry?
Boy, oh boy, uh, with Lonnie, it's maybe I'm being out there a little too far with the intuitive of things, but when I was around Lonnie, I picked up that he was a pretty broken person
Mm.
from the get go, and not that anything untoward was happening necessarily, but I knew I could pick up on his story enough, and he had a lot of stories about his mom, and she was a Church of Christ lady,
Mhm.
and she didn't really appreciate him being involved with the power of the Spirit very much.
Yeah.
And he was even praying one day at their trailer where they lived, and he's praying in tongues out loud. She could hear him. She goes, "Lonnie, are you praying in those?" She cussed a little bit. Tongues. He said, "No, mother, I'm practicing glossolalia." She goes, "Oh, well, in that case,
That's fine.
Church of Christ lady. God bless her. She loved the Lord, I'm sure. But what has happened to me though, Randy, is I think that from hanging with Lonnie, is there was something that was implanted in me just by, and again, we were not best friends. We knew other by name, et cetera. And there's a lot more Lonnie stories there. But at the same time, I began to to pick up on this is really the kingdom here,
Hmm.
the broken, the rejected, the abused, on and on. Lonnie was an archetype. He was the lead hobbit
Yeah.
in the sense that the one you would never ever expect to be the big influence
Yeah.
was Lonnie. And I think the movie did that well, about appreciating Lonnie and his role in the whole thing, in spite of his brokenness.
And now that you say that, I can actually see that in how you walked out ministry for years, and we've been together for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and how you're consistently drawn
Mm-hmm.
to those that maybe would others wouldn't be drawn to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I just be quite honest. I've been a benefactor of that.
Mm-hmm.
When we moved to Cincinnati, we were church planters. We had, we didn't have two clues to rub together, and I think the vineyard was, maybe about 6,000 people, and you made time for me, and we used to hang out all the time, and people would go, "Wow, it's amazing he's got time for you," and I thought, well, yeah, that is kind of amazing. But you kind of made a life of collecting folks that maybe other people wouldn't have collected. And I
Yeah.
remember you telling a story about going through a drive-through one time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a Taco Bell.
Yeah. It
Tell that story because I think that, honestly that might be some of the payday from learning from Lonnie.
Yeah, yeah, no, I completely agree, Randy. It was a Monday after, more than a half dozen. Face it, that according to Carl George from Fuller Seminary, we had by far, more life services at a Protestant church in America than any other church that he was positive we had way more than anybody else. And so at the end of the weekend, you're kind of tired. Twice on Saturday, we had seven, I think, at that time, five on Sunday. That's a lot of talking. I'm burned out. I'm saying, Janie, I need to drive around and think for a little bit. I'm feeling like maybe I'm not even called to ministry. It's so frustrating. Nobody's changing. Da da da. And she goes, "Well, just go drive around." As I'm driving, Janie calls me. "Could you get me a seven-layer burrito from Taco Bell?" Yeah,
I know you're having a crisis, but I need some calories.
yeah, yeah, especially that one because guacamole in it.
Right.
But it ends up that I pull in. They were training, well, apparently a very slow day with the line going through. No kidding, Randy. I sat in the line for at least 10 minutes, and I'm trying to figure out, I don't have a four-wheel drive. I have a little Honda something, or I could probably go over that curb with that tearing out the entire undergirding. But anyway, I was stuck in there, could not get off because of the curb. I'm sitting there barely moving forward. After 10 minutes, the Lord speaks to me. I hear it clear as a bell. "Open the door. I'll give you a gift." I thought, that is so weird. What the heck? I'm sitting there as I'm contemplating it. The line goes forward. And I thought, well, praise the Lord. I don't have to worry about that weirdness. Well, he says it again to me. "Open the door. I'll give you a gift." I thought, what I have to lose? Open it up. Look down there. There's a piece of gum that's been run over. I don't know how many times. It's been blacktopped over, put it that way. And as I look more carefully, I realized that is a penny. It's a discarded penny, but it's a penny and it hit me, not many are willing, perhaps, and perhaps I would not have been either if I wasn't sitting real low to the ground, didn't have to even bend over. Not many are willing to bend over to risk hurting themselves or wasting their time on a discarded penny. It's not worth it. And as I pry it up out of the ground, and by the way, it just didn't come up to the whole, a clod of asphalt. And I've apologized more than once to Taco Bell for that growing chuck hole in their parking lot. But as I was looking at it, I felt like the Lord, clear as a bell, spoke to me. And he said, "I've given you favor with discarded pennies." And, Lonnie was a discarded penny, big
Mm.
time. I would have to say that it sounds harsh, but I don't mean it that way whatsoever. He was one that God saw incredible value and potential in, and yet not many others did. And the funny thing is I have since then been in so many places, Randy, where I was so convinced I was wasting my time. Nothing is happening. God is not up to work, and yet I felt called to do it and to go
Yeah.
there, whatever the case was. And yet, in the end, when it was all said and done, he continues to say to me, "I've given you the gift of collecting pennies." And by the way, you can become a billionaire if you have no pennies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's been my boast, and I still absolutely feel that way. Uh, Going out, at least once a week and giving out stuff to the people on the street that are homeless. But and I think something happens there to me. I get renewed. The Lonnie factor, the whatever you want to call it, kicks in again every time you meet somebody like that on
Yeah.
the street.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, we look forward to connecting again, talking about some of these other things. Appreciate your perspective. What's on your day? It's early in California. What are you going to do the rest of the day?
It's barely dawn. No, it's mid morning. But yeah, I'm finishing a book, Randy. It's I don't mind telling the name of the book. It's Unleashing Kindness, and the subtitle is 101 simply profound ways to change your community. So
Very
I'm
cool.
finishing it up toward the very end. I could see the runway.
Very cool. Well, I am going to try and get all my kids in order here. They're home from school today and get a few things done. So we're going to jump off. But thank you, Steve. Again, we'll talk again soon about some of these other topics because there's a lot of
Thanks,
stuff
Randy.
to cover. Take care.
Fun stuff. God bless, man.